Hello fellow collectors, I hope you are doing wonderfully well. Today I continue with my monthly series, where I talk about the best films I watched in the preceding month, and today we tackle my April. I'm more or less keeping up with a film a day, numbers wise, this year, so I again saw a really good amount, and importantly for me, I've been keeping up with making some nice dents in my watch pile. It's also in April that I watched the Mad Max films, which I actually made a separate video on. So while I won't mention them here today, if you are interested to hear my thoughts about these fantastically wild films, please do check out my other video. I'll leave a link to it in the description. And so, without any further ado, let's talk about the best films I watched in April. First up is Thieves Like Us. From 1974 and directed by Robert Altman, this one stars Keith Carradine, Shelley Duvall, John Schuck, Burt Remsen, as well as Louise Fletcher and Tom Skerritt. I actually had no intention of buying this film originally, as I was really trying to be sensible with my money and not just keep up with the Radiance releases for the sake of it. But it was after watching The Incredible Three Women, also by Robert Altman and also starring Shelley Duvall, and I just felt I had to see more of their collaborations, and so I jumped on this one, which was handily reduced in price at the time. And my goodness, I'm so glad I decided to get it, as I thought it was fantastic, and it's easily one of my favourites I've seen so far from Radiance. The film has a great setting in 1930s Depression America, where crime and desperation run rampant. It's a film which seems to have no moral centre to it. It's almost entirely grey, which I think makes it a very human film, because you root for people despite their sometimes highly questionable or illegal things that they do. It's a very character-driven story and has a focus on brotherhood between men who find themselves all in the same boat, where each has their noticeable failings which are tolerated and perhaps even understood by the others despite the problems that they cause. One of them says, "I don't regret anything I ever did in this world," which is a pretty dark statement. Yet despite knowing each other's weaknesses and despite difficult events taking place, there is this feeling for each one of them that they can't let each other down. Carradine's character says at one point, "I can't let them wait for me if I'm not coming, no matter how good things are going for me." I think the loyalty shown by each is really very moving. I also thought that Carradine and Duvall were particularly excellent together, with some sizzling chemistry, and their small melodrama really added an extra element to this tale which drew me in even more and got me even more invested than I already was, as it gives them both a chance of a real life, which you feel like they want to grab hold of, but circumstances make that less than easy. Overall, this was a brilliant film with that great Americana taste to it, which also ended perfectly for the story, if not altogether unexpectedly. Next, I'll talk about two films together, but really I think it's more or less one film that's been split into two parts, and it's Jeanne de Florette and Manon of the Spring. From 1986 and directed by Claude Berry, Jeanne de Florette stars Yves Montand, Gerard Depardieu and Elizabeth Depardieu, real-life spouses at the time, and Daniel Auteuil, as well as Ernestine Mazurona, who plays the young daughter Manon. Then, in Manon of the Spring, Emmanuel Béat plays the grown-up Manon, and it also stars Hippolyte Girardot. This was astonishing and magnificent, an absolute triumph from Claude Berry, and easily one of the best things I've watched all year. This is a story of a family who inherits a farm in the country, and so leaves the city for a better life, and tries against all odds to make the difficult land and soil work, who struggle in particular for the most valuable resource of all, water. And it's also about a second family who do not want them to succeed, both of them surrounded by an apathetic and passive local community. It may sound like an unassuming tale, but let me assure you that this was utterly riveting, and at several moments gave rise to some furious emotion in me at some of the rampant injustices that you witness, which just make your blood boil. This was a tale that moves you incredibly deeply. The first film does a superb job in introducing the characters here, all of whom are very likeable, at least at first. Even those who play, I guess you'd say, the villains in the piece, you are still easily able to relate to each one straight away. These are people living their lives in a small community, farmers who live off the land, who prize family, and that just want something better for themselves and their future generations. However, when they feel that those interests have become at odds with this other farm, things, of course, take a darker turn. Gerard Depardieu is excellent in the first part in particular, portraying a man already unfavoured, if you will, in life, already lumped with an unpleasant burden to carry, but then also coming up against such almost insurmountable odds, fueled by his desire, his intellect, his love for his family, and his ironclad will to see the farm work so that his family can live a better life that he so desperately wants, and he gives every ounce of his strength and energy to try to make this happen. It's an amazing performance, and at the end of the first film, or the first part, I thought it was particularly savage, as it really breaks your heart and almost makes you sick to your stomach with bitterness, and I immediately put the second one on to watch to see how the story ends. The second film then picks up several years later, and the pace was increased somewhat, I felt, in this one, and there was more going on in this part of the story, particularly to do with the wider community. Emmanuelle Béart, aside from being absolutely astonishingly beautiful here, is superb as Jean's daughter, now grown up. She's living a somewhat simple and carefree life in the hills. She is a free soul, but definitely one that carries the inner wounds of what happened in the first film just a few years prior. And as you might imagine, things come to a head, and secrets that have been kept since the first one are now in the process of being brought out into the open, and my goodness, do things come to a powerful end. Now, I won't go into the story of this second part really, because it's tough to talk about without spoiling it, and to be honest, I did consider giving these films their own video, because I have so much more to say, and I might still do that, but on the off chance that more people will see this video, I really wanted to talk about them here, just to give my wholehearted recommendation to check these out if you haven't seen them. I will say that Béart's performance is incredible, with this simmering fury to her character, where her scathing looks and refusal to speak at times speak louder than any words ever could, where she has this inner fire which you can't help but feel emanating off the screen and into your own heart. This second part explores powerful themes to do with guilt, unrequited love, community responsibility, and the issue of forgiveness, and whether that's possible, as well as another thread to this one which makes it even more bitingly poignant, but that I won't reveal here. There are more than a few truly profound moments in these films, and it was an incredible experience to watch. Add to the brilliance of the story, direction and acting, and it was also beautifully shot with some superb camera work, almost Hitchcockian, or as it's French, shall we say, Chabrolian, at some points with some wonderful great movement following the action. And how could I not speak about the incredible performances also from the legendary Yves Montand and his nephew in the films, played by Daniel Auteuil. This is a masterpiece that really deserves your attention, and I can happily say that you can still get the Umbrella Blu-ray release that I have. It's still in print and available from them directly, and particularly on sale, extremely reasonable in price, even with the shipping from Australia. Then we have Trust. From 1990 and directed by Hal Hartley, it stars Adrienne Shelley, Martin Donovan, Rebecca Nelson, John McKay and Eddie Falco, and it was great to see her outside of Sopranos. This is one that I got recently after watching Solitary Ronin's video, where he was talking about his favourite films from the 90s, and he mentioned Amateur, which is a film also directed by Hal Hartley, and starring Isabelle Huppert in a rare English-speaking role. It's one that I've wanted to watch for a while, but sadly very out of print and very hard to find, which seems to be the case for nearly all of Hartley's films, which is a real shame. But I started looking for it on eBay and came across Trust, which happens to be on the 1001 movies list, so I decided to grab it. This was the first Hartley film that I've seen, and I loved it so much I immediately went to work to search out more from him, a few of which I've managed to track down on long out-of-print DVDs for not unreasonable prices. Trust was dark, deadpan, bitingly sharp and very witty. We meet these characters who are at first not very likeable at all really. Shelley's Maria and Donovan's Matthew seem to be very different on the surface, but both are selfish, harsh and a little bit cruel. I wasn't too sure what to make of it to begin with, and so it took me a little while to warm up to it and get into Hartley's sort of vibe. But once I did, this dark comedy really took off for me. The story slowly draws you towards these unlikely characters, each with a relatable component which hooks you. So despite the almost absurd and dark situations, you find yourself really invested. Also, as the film is played so straight, it makes these strange and extreme situations and even rampant hostility incredibly funny to watch, as strange as that might sound. Adrienne Shelley and Martin Donovan were absolutely fantastic together and had excellent chemistry as they become entangled over their broken lives and families. This one was strange and wonderful, and I can't wait to dive into more of Hartley's films as I manage to track them down. Then, moving on, I have just one film this month in my little segment on films that I haven't quite made my mind upon yet. Films that might have been particularly intriguing or mysterious in some way, so that I'm still thinking about them and what to make of them. This month I saw just one film that hits that mark, and it's On Body and Soul, which I picked up in HMV's excellent 2 for £15 on movie titles at the moment. This was such an interesting and ethereal film, I think. It's about two people that work at an abattoir, and they discover that they've both been having the same dreams. It's a film which explores human connection, I think both with and also without romance to some degree. It's a film which constantly has you curious, and one that I found incredibly engaging to watch. You see these very two different people in different stages of life slowly draw nearer together to explore this strange shared bond. It was a beautiful film. For the most part, that is, as there was one scene where I quite literally had to pause the film as fast as I could so I could run to the bathroom as I thought I was going to throw up. There are certain things that I just cannot take, and my goodness, the graphic nature of that scene was was way too much for me. But aside from that, and the scene's graphic nature does of course correspond to its importance and emotional resonance for the film, but aside from that, it is a very beautiful, quietly told film that is still on my mind. And then finally we are on to my honourable mentions, and I've got a good few this month. First up is Evil Does Not Exist, which I was lucky enough to see at the cinema. I loved Drive My Car, and this is Ryusuke Hamaguchi's next film. It's one where, as soon as it finished, I knew I needed to see it again. There is a depth to this film which I think demands multiple viewings to get the most out of it. Then we have Crime and Punishment, which is the first film from the Aki Kaurismäki box set which I recently picked up and that I'm making my way through at the moment. Next is a rewatch of Forrest Gump, which I just absolutely love. It's the story of a man's life, but also really the story of the United States in the second half of the 20th century. Roy from Blue Roy Movies made me laugh as he said it's far too sentimental and it's like eating a bag of candy floss, and I think he's spot on. But for me it just works, and I'm always a sucker for sentiment, what can I say? Then we have Fill Her Up With Super from Radiance, which I really quite enjoyed. A French road trip film which is very laddie, very masculine, but with an added really interesting twist to it, I thought. Then we have Pitch Black, which I hadn't seen for years, but I was glad to see still retains that low budget, almost trashy sci-fi brilliance. And lastly we have 8 Women, which is a stunning cast with Catherine Deneuve, Isabelle Huppert and Emmanuel Béat all together. A very enjoyable murder mystery with a musical twist. And at last that brings us to the end of the video and my April in film. A pretty stunning month film-wise. Well, I hope your April was also a wonderful month filled with great movies, and I hope your May is going really well too. And that, especially if you're in the UK, you're enjoying some of this lovely weather we've been having. Well, that's everything from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.